Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show, coming live from our festive location in downtown Calgary as Christmas approaches. Good to see you guys joining in already. Let's make use of that comment scroll. I see there's the second best beekeeper in Alberta in there. Jordan's checking in. Lotsy in there. We got lots to cover, lots of questions. I'm going to have Jay Hill coming in. He was the former government whip for quite a while. We want to talk all things federal, all things parliamentary. Jay's the man to ask. So send those questions that way, and we'll see if we can get some answers. I know it's hard to get clear answers out of anything in Parliament, but Jay's a straight speaker, so that'll be something to look forward to. And converse with each other, send questions my way. Just try to be somewhat civil with each other. We can fight on Twitter. That's what it's all about. There's always lots of good fighting going on there. All right, well, I'm going to get on with some news, things that got me going. And let's talk Canada Post. I've been having a lot of fun with them online. Everybody's having a good time. Good to see you there, Mary. So let's talk about where things are sitting with the postal strike. I mean, what if you went on strike and nobody cared? It's kind of like an ex who walks out the door and then, okay, you shrug. And a month later, she phones you because she's all pissed that you didn't call. Hey, you walked out. It's your problem. Found out that you didn't really want her that much in the first place. Well, postal workers are learning that hard lesson right now, that their service, it isn't as essential to people as they thought it was. Nearly a month on the picket lines, and all they've managed to accomplish is to lose public support and speed up Canada's transition to a paperless society. They can't hold Canadians hostage during the Christmas season any longer like they used to. Their strikes don't cripple the nation. All they do is annoy them. Demand for letter mail, it's not going to come back. And the only people who appear not to know this are the postal workers in the union. Canada Post was given a monopoly on letter delivery, but even with that, they can't fund themselves through it. Letter mail's dropped by over half in volume since 2016, and it's still dropping. Canada Post has lost $3 billion since 2018, and the losses are mounting faster. They might be on track to lose $1 billion in 2024 alone. This hemorrhaging can't continue, and unless something dramatic changes, Canada Post is going to go broke. Now, as a crown corporation, it's supposed to be self-funding. They love constantly saying, hey, we're not taking tax dollars. Well, actually, if they go broke, we get to pay for it. So taxpayers are liable for the debts incurred, and Canada's already in a rather dire economic situation with massive government debt, low productivity, and a rising cost of living. Adding billions more to the debt load if Canada Post goes under won't be doing us any favors. Not only should Canada Post refuse to give in to the union demands for raises, it's got to commit to scaling its size and scope dramatically down to face contemporary reality. The route to solvency for Canada Post might be harsh for its employees, but it's actually pretty simple. With 68,000 employees, labor is by far the biggest expense with Canada Post, and that's where the cuts have got to come. We've got to stop all direct-to-doorstep letter delivery. It's ridiculously expensive and labor-intensive. Over 2/3 of Canadians have already had their mail coming to some form of community mailbox or another already. The only reason the transition didn't fully go to community boxes was because Justin Trudeau cut a deal with the postal union back in 2016. Well, that deal's got to end, and the community boxes have got to go everywhere. One worker can cover the ground of dozens of carriers by just traveling from box to box to deliver mail rather than walking house to house. And delivery no longer needs to be daily. If a person has a pressing immediate need to have a document delivered to their door, they can pay express post or a private courier to deal with it. Postal workers deliver a little more than flyers daily these days anyways. There isn't enough demand to justify going out 5 days a week. Once a week will suffice. Twice tops. Canada Post should also just get out of the parcel delivery business. I mean, they had a near monopoly on it a few years ago and they blew it. The private market has filled the parcel void with superior service and now is a majority market share. Canada Post might as well just divest from it. At most, all Canada Post should be doing is providing some subsidized service to remote regions, but that's about it. By ending home delivery, ending parcel services, and cutting to 1 day a week, Canada Post should be able to shed tens of thousands of positions. I mean, they'll still have a legislative monopoly on letter service, and even if it manages to lose money in that size, at least the losses will be smaller than the current ones. And yes, lots of jobs are going to be lost. That's unfortunate, but that's life. There's not many milkmen delivering any longer either. Is Canada Post supposed to be providing mail service anyways, or is it a social welfare program? It's not. It's the only point's whether, to provide jobs. Well, then maybe we should just start a crown corporation to hire thousands of people to dig holes and fill them back in again. It'll serve the same purpose as using Canada Post as an employment program, but it won't contribute to as much traffic on the streets. Some postal workers would find employment in the private courier sector as that industry expands. Others are just going to have to retire or find new trades. And hey, they get a hell of a pension, guys. The strike has taught Canadians that losing Canada Post as we know it is an inconvenience at worst. We don't need a huge national postal service. And with the strike driving of millions of people into converting to electronic finances and communications, Canada Post must shrink. Let's cut it with a plan to transition workers as painlessly as possible, but let's get on with it. There's no longer work for film processors, record store employees, or barrel stave makers either. The world changes and the workforce must adapt to deal with it. Postal workers had a good gig, but the run's over, guys. Either way, that's where I wanted to go with things because, yeah, I guess the postal workers actually came back and increased their offer or asked for money. They're saying otherwise, but it was just that they spread it out over a different period of years. They really think they got some leverage here. Man, start a union around here. See how long Derek would put up with that. But let's see. Let's check with our shop steward and news editor Dave Naylor and see what else is going on in the news.
Cory, think of the Christmas cards. How is my mom going to get her Christmas card?
You're going to have to courier it to her.
Well, I can't afford that.
An e-card, I know. It's not the same.
Yeah, and I already see Derek coming out of his office to put an end to the union.
The right baseball bat.
Yeah, with a baseball bat. There's a Civil War sword that he's got in there. Anyways, Cory, let's talk crime. That's leading off the news this morning. StatsCan report out today showing since our friend Trudeau took office, was it 9 years ago, murder rate has jumped 27%. And of course, the Conservatives have jumped on this and are making hay of it. There was a murder just recently in Toronto. A young woman got murdered by her boyfriend who was out on bail. You know, he's a convicted violent offender, and he's out on bail and kills her. So it's just the streets aren't very safe out there now, Cory. In Coquitlam, a related type story, they've arrested a pervert for 9 sexual assaults. 9. And he was in custody probably for about 45 minutes before being released, but he's on conditions, so I'm sure everybody's safe there. Our newest staff member, James Snell, big guy, I didn't realize till I met him yesterday, 6'7".
Oh, geez.
He's a monster.
That's the guy you need in the front lines of the union.
Yeah, no kidding, eh? He's taking a fun look at Cybertrucks and how they're having a bit of trouble adjusting to this Canadian winter. They don't start and they can't get out of snow drifts and stuff like that. And when you're paying more than $100,000 for a truck, you kind of want them to do those things.
Yeah, I think he called it. I'm looking at the article, the ugliest vehicle ever made. I have to agree with that.
Yeah. But they certainly catch your eye, though, right? They may be ugly, but you have to look at them. Trudeau, speaking of Trudeau, he was at an event last night proclaiming he's still a proud feminist and sort of crapping all over the Americans for not electing Kamala Harris. Said it was the second time they've had a chance to elect a female president and didn't do so, and it's a backward step. So I'm sure that's going to go down well with his negotiations with President-elect Trump. And you remember speaking of good justice, you remember the video, I think it was back in January, of the guy in court, and he went flying after the judge when the attacker dove over the judge's desk there and was beating her. 26 years he got for that. So I think he's probably regretting his impulse decision.
Probably, and I agree with that. I mean, you can't have people threatening judges. That's not going to help the system. It's funny, the justices learn how to find long sentences when it's them who are being assaulted, but not so much when it's the commoner on the street. If they could just kind of apply that elsewhere.
It would be kind of nice, wouldn't it?
It'd be refreshing.
It would be.
All right, well, lots on the go as always.
I got to go call a courier now to get a Christmas card out to my mom.
Well, it's a sad thing, but we got to find our alternatives. And
I'm not arguing with you about the whole Canada Post.
Yeah, but that's the truth of it. Those are the people that are kind of getting harmed the most. So the seniors don't want to change tradition. An e-card sucks. Let's face it. Somebody sent an email with a little popping elf and confetti. It's not the same as sending a card. I mean, that's the inconvenience I'm talking about. It really is hampering people with this strike. Yeah. It's just not crippling us. It's pissing us off. Is what it's doing.
All right. Sorry, Mom, you're getting an e-card.
Oh, well, there we go. All right. Well, I'll let you get on with composing your annual e-card for your mother, and I'll get on with the show.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Dave. That is our news editor, Dave Naylor. And yes, lots on the go. Busy office, new people on, and it sounds like a giant with Mr. Snell coming in there. So I'll tread carefully if I'm going to critique his columns. The reason we're expanding, though, the reason we cover so much, and this is how we pay the bills, guys, I like to remind you, we're subscription-based. So if you haven't subscribed yet, get on there, westernstandard.news/subscription. It's $10 a month, $100 for a year. It funds me, it funds Dave, it funds Jen, folks all over. Jared working hard out in BC, gets those stories going, keeps this show rolling, and it keeps us from being dependent on the government for any funding whatsoever, which is important, because then we have to answer to you. So check it out, guys. Subscribe, buy a subscription for somebody for Christmas. I'm serious. You can do that. Why not? Let's see. Gifford's Honey Farm saying, I live in a rural area, only get mail 3 days a week since they opened decades ago. And it's a funny thing with my area. I live rural as well, and we have one of those communal post boxes. It's down the road. It's not that far. It's not that hard. And reality, Jane is very good for keeping up on electronic things and everything. So most of our stuff's been converted. We check it once a week, maybe. And usually it's just full of junk mail and the odd thing. We just don't need it that much. And then a funny thing, though, in our area, while supposedly mail comes 5 days a week, we've never once in the 10 years out there gotten a letter on a Friday. Nothing. It's amazing. Just an astounding coincidence, I guess. But for some reason, nothing ever hits the mailbox on Friday. Odd, isn't it? It would seem almost as if there's some room to improve things. But that's a Wild Nature Farm, also a commenter saying, Canada Post is trying to go more automated and get rid of lots of employees. Well, that is some of the stuff that's happening, some of the stuff they're striking against. But guys, we can't fight progress. I mean, the same thing, the milkmen were probably quite put out when the combustion engine came along and you weren't going up and down the roads with a horse and wagon any longer, but things change. How long should we hold back? How much more should we spend? As I said, if that's the point, let's get a big field, give them all a bunch of shovels, dig the hole, fill the hole, dig the hole, fill the hole, and we won't have to deal with the traffic jams of postal workers taking taxis to their routes every morning. It's not supposed to be a job program. It's supposed to be a postal service. All right, but we'll see. I don't think they're doing very well in this strike so far. People are losing more and more interest in them as every day goes by. We'll see how this settles in the end. All right, I've been looking forward to this. It's been a long time since Mr. Hill's been here to talk to us in person. We're overdue, and boy, we've got a heck of a year to review. So former government whip, longtime member of parliament, came out of so many years there, still mostly sane. And
thanks, Cory. It's great to be back on the program.
Yeah, no, it's good to see you. And boy, what a time we're in.
Well, what a fiasco.
Yes.
Yeah. I've never, as you said, I was there for 17 years from 93 to 2010, finished up my service as the government House Leader, cabinet position, full cabinet position. So I had the privilege and opportunity to sit at the big table. And of course, 17 years both in opposition and government to experience the House of Commons on a day-to-day basis. And I have to admit, Cory, I have never seen such a mess as we have currently in Ottawa. And it's an absolute joke. It's no wonder the re-elected incoming president of the United States, is teasing our prime minister about being the governor of the 51st state. Because, we have zero respect at the international level and not a lot more at the domestic level. And that's reflected in the polls these days.
Well, and outside of the polls, so for a lot of people watching politics, and that's it. I mean, in your job as government House Leader, you were immersed in, though, the procedures and things such as that. I mean, we've been in the midst of a filibuster for quite some time. And outside of, political weenies like us, just kind of what does that mean? And what's the purpose of it? Things are being hindered and bunged up in there. I mean, things aren't getting done.
Yeah. Which might be a good thing.
Well, perhaps. Yeah. A lot of the things they do aren't all that great anyways.
Yeah. Well, certainly not supported in Western Canada and Alberta in particular. So perhaps that, as I say, it's a very good thing. Now, for those people that aren't familiar, a filibuster is basically where one party uses the tools that they have in Parliament to carry a debate. And if necessary, all by themselves. They just put speakers after speaker up and speak to a motion.
Yeah.
And in the question of privilege, which we're debating now in the House of Commons and have been, I'll add, since September 26th. So 2.5 months, the House of Commons has been completely stalled of any business other than debating the conservative question of privilege. And I was involved in filibusters. I participated in a few myself. The government House Leader, if he has the ability, or she has the ability to take the time slot of the Leader of the Opposition, as I had on one occasion, you can speak for as long as you can keep talking. And but this is unique because a question of privilege takes precedent virtually over everything else. And that's why the opposition, as long as they stay united on this issue, I might add, because Singh doesn't stay united with the opposition on much, then they can debate it till the cows come home, until basically Parliament is adjourned roughly a year from now for an election. And the Conservatives, at least, have indicated they intend to continue this filibuster until then, if necessary, or until the government and specifically the Prime Minister capitulate and hand over these unredacted documents that the House has ordered. I've never seen this, where a government has just refused for 2.5 months to hand over documents to the opposition and by extension to the public.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to get to. I mean, they aren't just having a temper tantrum or holding up the House of Commons for the sake of holding it up. There is at least an ask, a demand, because we do have something bizarre going on. They've been ordered to say these documents on these issues. I think it was the green energy contracts.
Yeah, or as the opposition refers to it, the green slush fund.
Yes. So,
yeah,
I mean,
I think I have the right name down here somewhere. The Sustainable Development Technology Canada Fund.
There we go.
Yeah.
So, but the government obviously something stinks to high heaven. That's why they don't want to release
absolutely.
it. But
I think that there would be some criminal charges from what I've read about this.
Yeah.
It certainly lends itself because that's part of the demand from the House. And when I say the House, you remember that, ironically, we are in a minority government situation. If the opposition bands together, they can demand anything.
Yeah.
And as long as they have the votes, because the Liberals don't have enough votes to outvote them like they would in a majority situation. So what we have here is that not only are they demanding these unredacted, that means, not having entire sheets blacked out, but unredacted documents, but that they be turned over to the RCMP to see if there's a possibility that criminal charges should be laid.
Well, it says something, though, that our system is somewhat broken then in holding a government to account when the only recourse, when it's been ordered, I mean, we've done everything else possible. Hey, you're supposed to do this. And then they just stand and say, no, we won't do it. A filibuster is the only tool they've got.
Exactly.
This is not good.
No, it's a waste of resources, as they say, roughly 2.5 months. They're back on this today after taking a break for a couple of days to do bills that allowed for the appropriation of funds, because that's why I said earlier,
money bills are a different.
There's a conflict there about which takes precedence, and they agreed that the supply bills that supplies the government with the funds to carry through to the end of the fiscal year, which is March 31st, are at least equal in precedent. So the speaker ruled that they had to take a break. They had to get the remaining supply days, which are opposition days. That's why we had yet another vote on non-confidence by the Conservatives the other day. Ironically or not, it was defeated again because Singh, and I got to say that Jagmeet Singh, to me, just sitting back and watching the shenanigans during the House of Commons, he has got to be the greatest hypocrite in the history of Canada. Mm-hmm. That last, you probably have referred to this. I haven't watched your program, but for the last while. But that last motion for opposition motion for non-confidence in the government was actually crafted from the very words of Jagmeet Singh. Yeah.
Well, it was
and he still voted against his own words.
Yeah, it was a beautiful political maneuver. Yeah. I mean, it was forcing him, because he's always talked big but backed off. Well,
exactly.
Here's your chance. Yeah. All your very own words, put it into action. And of course, he backed off.
Yeah.
But again, it's just, I think a lot of Canadians are just starting to tune it out, though. And that's not a good outcome. No. I mean, they're getting cynical. I mean, becoming upset, becoming frustrated, it's natural, it's normal. But cynical is not healthy for a democracy. And they watch these games going on. And, left, right, center, doesn't matter. You start to think, well, who is leading us?
Yeah, well, no one, unfortunately, certainly when it comes to Prime Minister Trudeau. Absolutely, Cory. I'm just appalled at what's happening. We have disagreements all the time in the House of Commons. That's partly the purpose, right, is to have the different points of view.
You're across from each other.
But you hope that at the end, I mean, if it's the will of the House, that the government will accede to that. That's traditionally what happens. Yeah. But, this is not the first time this has happened. It happened under the early days of this government back in 2015, 2016. It happened under the SNC-Lavalin, where the government ended up losing their Attorney General,
Yeah.
Jody
Wilson-Raybould.
yeah. I mean, who was forced to quit because her ethics didn't allow her to do what the Prime Minister wanted her to do and protect that corporation. And then we had the WE fiasco, where they were going to give, I think it was over $1 billion to that corporation, and something stunk there to high heaven.
Yeah.
And we ended up that the Prime Minister called an election over that, And then more recently, we had the fiasco in Winnipeg with the health lab, and those two Chinese scientists. And we never did get the information. Again, the House was calling for unredacted documents showing what transpired there, and we never got it. So this is a prime minister and a government that is constantly consumed by covering up their own scandals.
And even the stuff that's going to come out, I mean, they're kicking every can down the road. The one thing they've been able to get through all this time is money bills and spending, and it shows. So the quarterly fiscal update, which is terribly late already, they've waited until the very bitter end.
Yeah,
they're going to drop it on Monday at the end of the session and hope everybody forgets at Christmas. But it's got to be bad. Yeah.
Well, the media is already onto the fact that it looks like rather than a $40 billion deficit, it looks like 50% greater. Perhaps as much as $60 billion this fiscal year. And you got to throw into the mix on that too, that Finance Minister Freeland has never hit a target yet in her whole time as finance minister. And when she's asked even a remotely tough question about the finances of the nation, she can't answer it. No. She's completely inept and incompetent. So you throw that in the mix, as well as a prime minister that's a laughingstock around the world. And indeed, I believe across Canada now. Saw a recent survey that suggested 80% of Canadians want an election.
We can't get it though.
No.
And I mean, so now
our system won't allow it.
So we're hamstrung right now. We're hung up. We're in a mess. They're still pulling off stunts like orders in council to ban guns and do other stunts. Right. I mean, there's ways they can do things without actually running it through the House. But we're coming up on a unprecedented year, a crisis. I mean, we have President-elect Trump coming in, who, whatever people think, like or dislike the guy, he's also one of the most impulsive, takes things personally, unpredictable presidents in known history. And the battle is coming with Canada, a trade war. I mean, this is when we need our House to have their crap together more than ever going into this year. And it's terrifying looking who we've got theoretically representing us going into that.
Exactly. And as I referred to already in the program, you see it. I mean, yes, we all have opinions. I think every Canadian has an opinion about Donald Trump. But setting that aside, he is the incoming president. He has learned things from his first tenure, and he's going to be taking action because of that. And when you have a president threatening, whether it comes to fruition or not, threatening a 25% tariff across the board on every product that we ship to our greatest trading partner, it's absolutely frightening, especially for small businesses that access the American market.
Oh, yeah.
And, we could see just an overabundance, unfortunately, of bankruptcies. Not that we're not experiencing enough as it is.
No, we'd be devastated. I mean, we're speaking of somebody like, President-elect Trump. I mean, he is a man, a lot of talk about. He responds at least to strength or somebody he can respect. And
that's the key word.
Those are the things we're seeing right now. He has no respect for Trudeau. He holds him in contempt, and that's not going to change. This is going to go poorly. Plus, Trudeau's not, there's my bias coming in. He's not a strong man. No. He's not going to be able to stand this down.
No, he's a fancy socks and tie and, hairstyles and whatever. But I mean, when it comes to competence, sadly lacking. It just amazes me that there are still people. I was reading an article, a column in the Toronto Star this morning. My goodness. And not surprisingly, Heather Malik was saying he's one of the great five that she produced for a short list of important Canadians for this year. I mean, there's people like her that will still support Justin Trudeau after everything he's done to destroy our nation.
Yeah, I think she might have sustained a head injury at some point in her life. So Malik's a special sort of case, but it does say a lot there. But there's always that core. I mean, everything hits a bottom.
Yeah.
The Liberals are sitting at about 20%. There's those people who say, I will vote Liberal till I die. That's that 20%. It wouldn't matter who or what or however it was done. That's going to sit there. But I can't see how it's going to climb. Another thing I'm worried about, like I've written a column on it that'll come out in a little bit. It's a bit speculative, but we know how the political game plays and the regional play. Premier Smith's been fantastic in developing relationships with governors. She's going to the inauguration. Alberta has an office in Washington. We've been doing the job Canada should have been doing.
Yep.
And that might shield oil and gas if tariffs start coming. Because, Trump's no fool. He knows if you throw that tariff on Alberta oil and gas, the price at the pump of the States is going to rise up, and people are going to be upset with him on the States too.
Yeah.
So if he can find it out, maybe he'll carve out oil and gas.
Yeah, exactly. I would think there would be an exemption coming if it gets that far.
But then the temptation on Trudeau's part would be, well, I'm not going to let that happen. He might do like his father did and throw an outgoing tariff on Canadian oil and gas leaving here.
Yeah.
Then we're going to see a unity issue. I mean, hey, I'll sell more books than I ever have in a year. but still, for the sake of the country in Alberta, that's not going to be a good development.
No, and as you said earlier, Cory, especially not at this particular time. At this particular time, when it comes to negotiating with the Americans in particular, but the Chinese and any other entity around the world, we need to be unified on the international front. We're not going to be unified, obviously, in the House of Commons and on domestic issues like, the carbon tax, for example, because Pierre has clearly staked his future on that issue and others. But on an international front, and I have personal experience in this. I mean, when I was in opposition, I often traveled to foreign conferences with the minister that I was critic of. You still see that today. And, trying to present a somewhat unified position by all political parties. And we're not the only democracy that does that. I mean, the UK, Australia, they all do that when they're negotiating or when they're interacting with other foreign countries. So this, as you said, is a really crucial time. There are so many huge issues, not the least of war in the Middle East, war in the Ukraine, where as much as possible, we need our parliamentarians to set aside partisan differences and really operate. And Pierre has called for this, by the way, Pierre Poilievre. He has called on the Prime Minister as recently as last week to form a unified front on these issues. He was specifically speaking to opposition to the prospect of tariffs, but it could be on a multiple of issues at the international level.
Well, then another challenge we have is our foreign affairs minister. Trudeau has appointed his intellectual peers to high cabinet positions, and it's showing. And Melanie,
especially I would argue the big two, our finance minister and our foreign affairs minister.
Yes, and again, it gets distressing. I mean, Melanie Joly is not commanding respect around the world. She's embarrassing herself and us through extension with her clear lack of knowledge whenever she's in a press conference or at a conference of any sort. I guess I'll leave you off with a big question, though. I mean, as we come into, election doesn't look like it's likely until a year from now. Maybe in spring at best. What could we hope for in January? Let's leave off with a bright note. What could Parliament maybe do? I mean, I know it's not looking good, but.
Well, because the Conservatives have quite rightly, and I don't say that not as a Conservative myself or a Conservative yourself, but because they have really staked their ground on this question of privilege on these documents, right? And I think justifiably so. Anybody that looks at that issue is going to say, well, what is going on here? If they're resisting, Prime Minister Trudeau and his ministers, including ministers that allegedly funneled money, according to the Auditor General, funneled money to their own companies through this slush fund. If they're resisting to that extent, there must be something, as you said earlier, something really dirty there. So the only way I can see this resolved in January, February, whatever, going forward, is that there has to be some negotiation on that issue between the parties. Yeah. Now, whether it will happen that, for example, if they would provide certain information and still withhold some redacted. In the past, they've said, it's the issue of national security. That's why the documents are redacted. I can't see that applying to a green slush fund. But however it is, I mean, it's sort of like the postal strike. I mean, there has to, at some point, you would think there has to be some negotiation, and where they can arrive at an agreement. Otherwise, as I see it, the House is going to be held up like this, as I said earlier, right through until the election. I mean, Jagmeet Singh, we used to think, okay, well, after he gets his MP pension near the end of February, perhaps then on the budget in March or April, perhaps the government will fall and we'll have a spring election instead of having to wait till October. But as of what he said the other day, when the Conservatives produced that non-confidence motion based on his own words, and he did a complete, ate himself alive, basically, and he did a complete flip-flop. He said, no, I intend to honor the agreement that I made such, a show of tearing up in October. I intend to honor that, and it goes until the House rises in June. So that kind of takes, if that's true, and we never know with him what is true, but if that's true, then we're stuck until summer at least.
Boy, and it's just not there's never a good year to have a hung parliament like that, but this is a really bad one we're going into. I'm really quite worried, to be honest.
And I don't know, how you solve it. I mean, many people have said, well, what is the problem? I mean, in a democracy, especially when you have poll after poll, never mind whether they're going to vote Conservative, Liberal, NDP, Bloc, whatever, but poll after poll showing the majority of Canadians want to exercise their right as citizens and vote. And the government ignores it.
Well, it's an ugly circumstance. Either way, we'll try to leave on a bright note. The weather's been good. Christmas is coming up. New Year's coming up. I hope you and Leah have a fantastic one. I really appreciate you coming in to talk to us about this, and I hope we can get you back in the new year. Maybe we'll see if we've had some progress to dissect.
Well, that would be nice. It'd be nice to certainly have a more cheery conversation. But if I could, just before I go, I attended an event with Leah, my wife, a couple nights ago, and it was the Allies for a Strong Canada. It's a new organization. I don't know how many of your viewers are as concerned as I've been over the last year since the tragedy of October 7th with what happened in Israel. With the rise of anti-Semitism across our country, never mind around the world. I mean, it's not unique to Canada, but it's appalling that it is here and that our government is doing nothing. And so there's this new organization, and I would encourage everybody watching to go to Allies for a Strong Canada. It's easy to find. Google it. It costs nothing to join, to show your support for our fellow Jewish citizens and communities across Canada during this time when they're frightened to send their kids to school. They're frightened for their own safety. Some of them, unfortunately, tragically, are thinking about moving. It's become so unsafe in Canada. And I hope you go there and join it. It costs nothing, but it would mean so much to our fellow citizens.
Great. Well, thanks for that plug. It's good to get together. I mean, if a parliament can't do it, citizens groups have to at least get the messaging out there, and we got to start taking care of things ourselves.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks again, Jay. Good to see you. I'm sure we'll see you again soon.
Absolutely.
All right. So, yes, it's always good when Jay comes in to break that down. And, I know it was so negative because there's just so much to cover. But at least, if we see the system, we see things like that, we've got to discuss them. Eventually, we'll find the solutions. We'll figure it out. It's just a matter of how bad we got to let things get before we get there. That's the hard part. And that's the difficult one to come. And with this year coming, it is it's distressing. Yeah, the government's it's hung up. There's people talking whether or not it would be prorogued. I'm really worried. Like I said, history just seems to have a heck of a habit of repeating itself. So here we are again, another Trudeau. We know, it's south of the border, things are quite different with Trump. There's never been another quite like him. But I do see a potential scenario where Trudeau would try to use Western Canadian oil and gas and agricultural products as a hammer to fight back in a trade war. Like Trudeau has said he would retaliate in a trade war. Well, how can you? Because that's the problem with the trade war, though. It does hurt both ways. I would like to think that President Trump really doesn't want to impose those tariffs. I mean, it hurts consumers on both sides when you do that sort of thing. It puts the cost of goods up. Trump has always been a protectionist. Democrats always have been in the States too. And to be blunt, it's stupid policy. Protectionism is always stupid policy. If you want to talk to any economists worth their salt when they talk about things, protectionism sells well at election time, but when it comes to actual benefits for your citizens and companies and economy, it tends not to actually pay off. But the bottom line is it's there. It's something we got to deal with. And it's something, again, as Jay was saying, talk about a politician staking ground. It's certainly where Trump has staked a lot of ground on that protectionism. So there's going to be some things coming up anyways, even if they aren't the 25% tariffs he's talking about. But one of the ones, as I said, that would hurt the most, if a 25% tariff was slapped on Alberta oil and gas here for exports, for the amount of oil and gas Canada exports, even with the Trans Mountain now flowing, which is about bloody time. Trudeau didn't kill it. He just messed it up. 97% of our exports go to the States. They still go to the States. They go to American refineries, and they're dependent on it, whether it's over in Chicago or down in Texas and throughout, and West Coast refineries as well in Seattle area. So the cost would be felt immediately if you threw that tariff on Canadian oil and gas. And I just don't think Trump is eager to do that. But the political game. So if Alberta's sitting well, let's say these tariffs come in, but they come in on Quebec and Ontario's auto sector, and then they crunch on there and on BC's forestry, maybe even because they've got forest products and softwood lumber they can fill the void with. But if Daniel Smith's been effective and they exempt oil and gas, man, that's going to put a big target right on the West for Trudeau. Because he's desperate and he wants, I honestly think he's kind of wants a trade war at this point. What else is going to possibly turn the polls around? He has to try and build a villain and build himself as a hero. And it's not going to work, but he's willing to try, and he's willing to sacrifice our economy, particularly the Western Canadian economy, to do it. And the envy, the division in the country. I mean, though, if Central Canada was hurting, if their battery plants weren't exporting anymore, and things such as that because of tariffs, but Alberta's actually booming because our oil and gas is still flowing freely across into the States and our agricultural products. The envy in this country is going to be bad. Because look at how Trudeau is stoking the fires. You've got a problem with President Trump. So what does Trudeau say the other day? This is a literal quote from Trudeau. Just a few weeks ago, the United States voted for a second time to not elect its first woman president. Everywhere, women's rights and women's progress is under attack, overtly and subtly. Basically, Trudeau just called Americans misogynistic bigots who refuse to elect women. Good move, Justin. Smart. Really working well. You know how many women have led the Federal Liberal Party of Canada historically? 0. Not a one. In fact, Justin Trudeau's got quite a strong reputation for kicking strong women out of his cabinet, out of his caucus, pressuring them. There was that one black member of parliament who said she was scared almost for her life when Justin had a temper tantrum on her behind closed doors. The hypocrisy of that man is something else. But again, he's taking aside an election that's already passed. He's throwing an endorsement to the losing candidate while infuriating the winning candidate. To what end? To what purpose? You twit. So again, Trump takes things personally. I wish, I've talked about it, I get in battles with my commenters at times. I'm not a big fan of Trump. I would have rather the Republicans brought in a deeper thinking, more type of leader. But he's who's there. He's who the Americans chose, and that's who they have. And we have to work with him. And one of the things to deal with him is he takes it bloody personally. So Justin doing that crap. And now Trump, yes, lobbing out more comments and calling Trudeau the governor. It's not helping us. It's not helping at all. Again, looking in Alberta, smart leadership, things that are happening. This has been fun to watch, especially as a regionalist like myself. Premier Smith announced that a potential new data center for Alberta or artificial intelligence that's going to be set up in Greenview, Alberta, a rural area, kind of getting between Grand Cache and Grand Prairie for people in Alberta. It's kind of in the foothills mountains area. It's going to be $70 billion. $70 billion if it goes through. But it sounds like, O'Leary is moving with it. The Alberta government's certainly on board. And the reason that they're picking that spot, so there's a few reasons. One of which is massive amounts of natural gas reserves there. As was pointed out, there's a lot of stranded reserves because it's too hard to get pipelines in, but the gas is there. So they can generate, because these are power-intensive projects. Alberta's diversifying. Alberta's moving ahead. Alberta's doing high-tech things. It's moving forward, despite Canada, not because of it. And but that helps also bring about envy when the rest of the country is hurting. Unfortunately, rather than fixing themselves, sometimes they tend to support governments, they'll try and make a grab for it. As I said, with history repeating. If you look back to when Pierre went and took a shot at our resources before Pierre Trudeau back in the 80s, the National Energy Program, total disaster, just castrated Alberta's economy. Much of that was just built on political envy because Alberta was doing fine. And, the funny thing is prior to that, if you look at Alberta oil history, because part of their concern was that there was too much American ownership in the Alberta oil field. Well, you see, Alberta hit oil back in the 40s was kind of the big ones. There was oil before, but the real big ones with Turner Valley, Leduc, those hit in the early 40s. Really started to boom, but it was still heavier oil, expensive oil, things than that. And Alberta at that time felt, Ottawa, can you help us? Do you want to buy Alberta oil? Can you invest in it? Can you go along with this? And they said, no, keep your oil. It's too expensive. We can get our stuff from out east. We can get it from tankers. We don't need your oil. Keep your Alberta oil. Okay. Albertan leaders went stateside, and American companies came up and developed it and produced it and turned it into a good industry. And then in the 70s, when the price shocks hit with, yes, another Middle Eastern war, again, history repeating, suddenly Alberta's booming. Then they call us the blue-eyed sheiks. Now we're the bad guys. Now we're greedy. Now we're nasty. Now the oil that was Alberta's oil is suddenly Canada's oil. And Pierre made a run for it. And what a disaster that was. Well, Justin's dumber than Pierre. So we really, really got to watch out when these trade wars come, because we could be the tool that they want to use to try and fight back with the United States. And what have they got to lose? We've got Saskatchewan has 0 Liberal seats. Alberta has 2 Liberal seats. One is George the Porch Pirate Chahal, who's never going to be reelected. He was caught stealing mail from somebody's mailbox. Yeah, these Liberal members of Parliament are a real pleasure. And of course, we got Pocahontas up there in Edmonton, who is going down in disgrace. It's a wonder he hasn't been, forced out of office just as it is. So, no, there's not going to be any Liberal seats in Alberta, Saskatchewan. So, seat-wise, what does Trudeau care if he beats the heck out of Alberta and infuriates Alberta? He's got nothing to lose here, and that makes it dangerous. It really does. And then speaking of other weird policies, Syria, things have been interesting developing over there, I guess. I don't know if you could call it interesting. They've traded one bunch of fanatical, dangerous, tyrannical, rapist, murderer lunatics. Assad was one of those, and now Assad is gone, and they've got a different bunch of them in. So what? It is much like Afghanistan. How many different, regimes have gone in? And it does show the futility of messing around in foreign affairs. I mean, the Taliban was kind of, I know people talk about it as, dismissed as conspiracies. No, there's truth to it. I mean, Osama bin Laden was built up by American funding to fight the war against the Afghan government and fight against the Russian incursion back then. But then they created this monster that turned into the Taliban that took Afghanistan. And then they had to fight back that monster, and they knocked the Taliban out for a while. But the second the West left Afghanistan, the scumbags all moved back in, took over. The Taliban's basically in power again. Syria, same thing. Assad, terrible dictator, awful, slaughtering hundreds of thousands of people. It's funny. It's a genocide when Jews defend themselves and kill 20,000 Hamas scumbags. But when Assad kills 500,000 people in Syria, suddenly the left is silent. I don't know why. Muslim on Muslim war isn't worth covering, I guess. But the bottom line is we got to talk about some stuff, guys. Those Middle Eastern countries are theocratic cesspools run by Islamic regimes. They're going to be human rights nightmares no matter what you do. There's a common denominator among them, guys. It's radical Islam. That's the problem. It doesn't matter whether it's ISIS or Hamas or Hezbollah. They split. They fight with each other. They come up with all these different names. The bottom line is they're all Islamist extremists. That's what the enemy is for. And I'm just talking the enemy of humanity. I'm talking about the enemy of decency, the enemy of human rights, of economic development, women's rights, LGBTQ rights. It's Islam. And that's what we got to be watching. What do we got going on, though? Well, every other country that took in all those Syrian refugees and found out that they took in, not good. Europe did not enjoy it. They had mass rapes going on in Germany, all sorts of problems when they brought in those Syrian refugees when Assad started his crap over 10 years ago. Europe, as soon as Assad was out, said, okay, that's it. The refugee program is over. We're getting them the heck out of here. Thanks for visiting, guys. Go away. We took care of our part. Not Canada, though. We're still bringing them in. Why? Hey, if Assad's gone, the ones who are here should be going home to rebuild their country. That was the point, wasn't it? Weren't we supposed to just house them till they could go home? Well, now you can go home. Instead, we're still taking them in. I don't know. We got a lot of big problems, guys. We got a broken parliament. We got a lot of other stuff. Hate to leave on such a negative note. I hope for the rest of things positively that you're all getting ready for Christmas. You're having a good time. Try to keep the spirits up. I mean, the world won't end even if it feels like it, and especially the way I talk about it. But we got to talk about the negative things if we're going to fix them. And there's lots to feed on out here. Either way, that's what I've got for today, guys. Tune in next week. I'm going to have Tony Bernardo talk about, yes, the firearms grab and lots of other things. So thank you for joining in. Be sure to tune into the pipeline and share these channels around. Get a subscription if you haven't already, and I will see you all next week at this time.